Hi folks, I did this video, it's an interview with Doug McGuff, Dr. Doug McGuff, whose video on resistance training on YouTube was so excellent, you can look it up, that I watched it many times and learned about exercise, specifically the chemicals released by muscle when you do exercise, and especially the chemicals released when the resistance exercise is very tough, that is uncomfortable, because apparently, so he says, that intensity is the very thing that triggers the body to change itself to develop more muscle and put out all those chemicals for strengthening bone, making the brain healthier, and generally helping you. Look, you can see all that stuff in his own video. Paid a certain fee and went online and booked an appointment to Zoom with him. I told him that the reason for consulting him was that I wanted to live 30 or more years. I'm 73 now, but apparently according to Span Health I'm 60 years old, 61 years old biologically, and I wanted to live another 30 more years if I could, so that I could enjoy the benefits of future technologies that would enable me to depart from this biological host and be in a non-biological host, a electronic one, that sort of thing, will still be able to sense even more than I can now, express itself better, be more cognitive, and feel everything more intensely, for better and worse. I referred to Dr. David Sinclair, Peter Diamandis, and Ray Kurzweil. They're famous guys you could look up as well. And I specifically asked him, when we die of natural causes of old age, what specifically is that?
I don't think it's a one moment kind of thing. I think it is a gradual, just like we talk about the physiologic head rate, declining until the most you can do equals the least you can do, and then you just go. Yeah, I mean, it's a multifactorial process, but the total sum of that reaches a point where there is inadequate resources to sustain ongoing life. So basically, that someone asked one time, how would you identify if there's life out there in the universe besides us? And the answer was, I would look for a place where entropy was reversed. And that's basically the essence of life, is to try to oppose the process of entropy. And when there is not enough available input of energy to oppose entropy for long enough, you gradually have a loss of resources where life can no longer be sustained. I mean, look, you're biologically 61, but you're in your 70s. I am 60. You and I both know that the way you are and the way I am is not the same as it was when we were 20. You and I are not dead yet, but there is no denying the fact that we are already decomposing. So I think the evolutionary backdrop for how our bodies evolved was out of an environment where we had a large amount of activity that was of relatively low intensity, that fed more substrate through the slower twitch muscle fibers that were more aerobic and more populated with mitochondria, that the vast majority of our activity was carried out at that low level of intensity, and we intermittently experienced episodes of very high intensity exertion that stimulated these other energy systems. I think that is a fairly good way of trying to replicate that evolutionary backdrop out of which we evolved. But it is artificial. I mean, if we could all just become hunter-gatherers and go out and let this happen spontaneously and organically, that would probably be even more ideal. But I think it is a very good backdrop for optimizing our metabolism. For animals, and humans in particular, that movement is our most preserved biologic function. Without movement, we can't get food, we can't keep from becoming food. And what we're doing with high intensity exercise is we're putting the skeletal muscle under a continuous and uninterrupted load that fatigues the muscle very deeply, where under that load, we are no longer able to move. That is a powerful biological signal that stimulates multiple pathways as yet unknown that result in the synthesis of more and stronger lean tissue and all of the metabolic subsystems that support that lean tissue, so that if we encounter muscular demands of that magnitude in the future, that we are guaranteed to be able to meet that and have something left over. That's kind of the whole kind of 1,000-foot view of what's going on with it. In terms of the myokines that are released, the chemical messaging going on, the senolytic effects of protein turnover, of destroying misfolded proteins and senescent cells. All that is accomplished during high intensity exertion. So there's a multifactorial process that's going on that's beneficial for the organism, both in terms of its strength and functioning, but also in terms of its longevity. Exercise of a meaningful intensity is one of the most powerful senolytic molecules, and to create turnover of senescent and worn out cells, misfolded proteins, and other things that are damaging to the organism as a whole. On a broad basis, and as a society, divest ourselves of the notion that exercise, for the purpose of producing a significant adaptation, that exercise should be enjoyable. We need to have a concept of there being a very distinct barrier and division between exercise and recreation. They are not one and the same thing. No hunter-gatherer ever voluntarily was motivated to perform exercise of a high intensity. It was because the situation was imposed upon them. And we have to carry that forward to the people that we try to sell this notion of the value of this kind of exercise, and just explain to them it is by its very nature demanding and unpleasant. As an individual doing it, the discomfort of doing, particularly, large muscle groups, you're doing a leg press, it is exquisitely unpleasant to training in a meaningful way. But I have found that for a trainee, the way to get them around that discomfort or pain is to have them focus on that pain in the process of doing the exercise, focus on it, drill down on it, and deliberately try to make it worse. And as you do so, it is like running up on a mirage on a hot pavement or in the desert. As you run up on it, it disappears and goes away. It's the actual avoidance of the discomfort or the turning away from the discomfort that amplifies it. If you deliberately take charge of it, focus on it, try to make it worse, it actually will dissipate. But from a broader society-wise motivational standpoint, I think the real answer that everyone's got to give is suck it up, buttercup. It's what's necessary. Mother Nature used to impose it upon all humans, and now that we're able to escape it, we got to realize that that's not a good thing. Look, I think we got to be happy to acknowledge that in modern society, someone like yourself, you represent less than 0.5% of the population easily. And that, as hard as I've tried to spread this message and tell people, I've become more and more comfortable with that concept. And there's lots of people who say, I just don't want to work that hard. I don't want to do that sort of thing. I don't want to watch my diet like that. My answer is, that's fine. I'm happy to push your wheelchair. That's part of that is why my business, my exercise facility exists. A lot of people would never go there were it not for well-informed, well-educated, professional, continuous, uninterrupted, vigilant supervision. We have plenty of people that are couples. One couple's enthusiastic, came in voluntarily. The other drugged their spouse in who wanted no part of this. But with appropriate professional supervision, make no mistake, to take a client like that through a proper workout is like dragging a crazy horse through a burning barn. But those people still got the excellent results that the more enthusiastic spouse got, because they were brought there almost against their will, and then they were drugged through the process by someone that knew how to get that out of their spouse did. So spouse says, someone that's motivated comes in and does it, they see the benefits of it, and they're like, you're coming, you're going to try. But the actual training of someone and getting them to put out the effort, that's what we train trainers for. That's what certification is about. That's what the education is about. It is not an easy process. I mean, I'm an emergency physician. I resuscitate dead and dying people in the ER regularly. I can tell you, to take a difficult client through a proper workout is as challenging as doing a major resuscitation in the ER. It is a very professional skill to be able to do that with someone. And I think it's a very valuable skill. I pay my instructors a lot because it is hard. It is a hard job. I describe being a good instructor as sort of like being a Sherpa. You get some wealthy businessman that just wants to say that he climbed Mount Everest, and they hire a Sherpa. And that Sherpa drags a relatively nice, excruciatingly difficult and dangerous adventure by the skill of being able to do that. And that's what a good instructor for this kind of exercise is like. finishing out the shower with a cold exposure. I do think there's value to it. I think that the exact mechanisms are multifactorial and not fully understood, but from a first principles basis, I think I can say that if we can understand that the little ice age that occurred several hundred years ago killed about 2/3 of the population of the European continents. So we are all the descendants of the people that survived that mini ice age, which begs that there are elements in our body that were robust to that kind of cold exposure, that when re-exposed to it probably activates this biological signaling that's beneficial in multiple ways, because we are the descendants of people that survived through extreme cold. So to introduce that as a hormetic stimulus from someone that has evolved from that kind of past into a modern environment where we're never exposed to that sort of hormesis in our day-to-day lives, to reintroduce that hormesis with our evolutionary backdrop of all being survivors of that mini ice age, I think probably explains why there are so many biological benefits to doing it. But the emphasis of the book was just to try to get people to understand a different paradigm of exercise, that it was not based on quantity, but instead based on the quality of the exercise, because that intensity is what defines things that produce skeletal muscle adaptations, particularly in terms of preservation of strength and muscle mass. That everyone had a notion in their head of that there was a certain amount of exercise that you had to do to get benefit. And they were ignoring the fact that exercise did not directly cause an adaptation in the body. That what exercise was actually a stressful hormetic stimulus that was perceived by the body as a threat, and that the improvements as a result of exercise are actually generated by the body during the recovery period as an adaptive response. And when you're talking about building skeletal muscle mass and all the metabolic subsystems that support it, you actually require, number one, a stimulus intensity that's high enough that actually necessitates a relatively brief workout, but then a recovery period that's long enough for the body to actually synthesize its adaptive response. If you were doing exercise of an adequate level of intensity to demand an increase in skeletal muscle mass and strength, the intensity of that exercise is severe enough where you really cannot stand more than about 12 to 15 minutes of that kind of exertion. It will last 15 minutes or less, and that will require between 4 to 7 days for your body to completely recover and synthesize its adaptive response of producing more tissue. So for strength-based exercise, for exercise to improve skeletal muscle strength on the high intensity spectrum, you're talking about very brief workouts conducted every 5th to 7th day. And that just seems counterintuitive to what a lot of people have in terms of their notions of exercise. But for this kind of exercise to address skeletal muscle mass and strength and the metabolic subsystems that support it, it's actually a necessity for it to be that intense, that brief, and that infrequent. And the purpose of the book was to introduce that concept to people because they were not used to thinking in those terms.
I've taken up the half hour we had. Thank you very much, Doug. And I will be delighted to show this to the group. And maybe some of them might contact you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Tell them I said hi. It was good talking to you.
Great. Thank you.